Homelessness is something that universally tugs on our heartstrings. You see that person with a sign by the side of the road. You want to help. So you stop and give money or whatever you have with you. As you will learn in today's conversation with Chuck Wilbanks of Safe House Outreach, that does not help, and in fact may be causing more harm than good. As uncommon philanthropists, we are here to learn and then to mobilize. As it turns out, helping our homeless brothers and sisters is not about money or donation of items. It's about connection and love. Let go. We have such a fantastic show for you today. Chuck Wilbanks is here, and he is the Director of Outreach for Safe House Outreach here in Metro Atlanta, and they do just such a tremendous job serving our homeless neighbors in Metro Atlanta. So I know you're going to learn a lot from Chuck and really walk away inspired and empowered on how we can better serve our brothers and sisters in need. So Chuck, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I know. Well, we've just recently got acquainted, and I enjoyed meeting you so much and learning more. Your background is so very interesting. So you're a preacher's kid, which that can either be good or bad, or I think in your case it's kind of a mixed bag, but led you to where we are today. So let's talk a little bit about your background, Chuck.
The way I always start, when people ask me my story, it always begins with, I'm the son of a preacher. There's no better way to explain who I am and how God has used that to form me. But like you said, it's a mixed bag being the son of a preacher. Until about the age of 8 or 9, we lived in the rural South. We moved often into small churches. Life was pretty comfortable. We were never wealthy by any means, but if you're the son of a preacher, you have a little bit of respect in the town, and life is very easy. And the way I explain it, I remember the skies being blue and the grass being green, and it was just it was a colorful and easy childhood until about that age of 8 or 9, where my dad decided to go to seminary, and he moved the family from this kind of rural setting with the blue sky and green grass into the inner city, into a really rough neighborhood in Fort Worth, Texas. And so that's when things turned from the colorful to gray, kind of the opposite of the Wizard of Oz. Life was really hard there. I was out of my element. I didn't look like anybody else. I didn't talk like anybody else. And life was just really tough to adjust. And so seeing things I'd never seen in my previous life, seeing the guns and knives and violence and drugs and people being hurt and harmed and myself being hurt and harmed, terrified almost daily, not knowing how to adjust to that really started to impact the way I saw the world and wondering why God would allow such things. And so for those 3 years, life was just really, really hard. And so my dad, like I said, was in seminary. So we were in the church. And I remember being completely invisible. When I needed things the most, I remember being invisible. I mean, we were poor. We didn't have, money to offer to the church. So I think a lot of times when you're in a church and you're not affluent, a lot of times you're overlooked, sadly. And I needed the church. I mean, when your dad's a preacher, you know scripture, you know Jesus, and I love Jesus. But God seemed pretty quiet in those years. And I started to this resentment in the church began to really well up inside of me, because I would go to the church bruised up and afraid and sad and needing somebody. And I would hear the church use words like, hey, we love you, or we love our people, or we're going on to a mission trip to Romania this weekend, or like these things. And I was just wondering, where was the church here in the city? Like, really,
Yes.
where was the church for the people like me and the people like I was going to school with that were encountering deeper suffering than I think the church is often aware of? I think sometimes the church can be a country club and we insulate ourselves from the world instead of engaging in the world. And like I said, a resentment began to really well up inside of me. So when I got back,
We've got a youth program for that, or we have there's prescribed solutions that they think are helpful when they're really not. It's like you have to open your eyes to the hurting people in front of you. And I know teenagers are real good at putting on the mask and, not really letting you in to know how deep that pain is.
That's interesting. I
Were
think
you open with your struggle with your parents and the church with what was going on with all the bullying and the violence?
I was open with my family. The church didn't seem to care. The church was very involved in just being the church. And that seems to be a very common thing in the church. And that's what we're trying to really just say is that this is not what Jesus intended when he built his body as the church. He intended us to be involved and to get our hands dirty and not just be donors.
Yes.
And I think that's the biggest thing is like we want to give to solve things, but we don't want to give our time to solve things. And I've seen this to be the biggest kind of hindrance. And I don't know if it's just out of fear, if it's out of a sincere faith that God can actually do something, if it's out of judgment for those people who could do better, they're just not willing to do better. There's a billion things that would go through my head. And so, like I said, this judgment, it really, really crept up in me. But I'm just saying, like, this was my experience being in pain and being in a place where that's explicitly built to do something for that pain and to offer hope in that pain. And I didn't find it there. So when I got back to Georgia, ironically, the same people that were beating me up and like in Texas were the same people who took me under their wing when I got back. Because there was an understanding now, I think. And I didn't understand the Lily White Church anymore. And I would go to church, and I would hear these things about where they talked about faith and love and missions, and I didn't believe it. I believed the gospel, but I didn't believe the church believed the gospel they were preaching. And I even find that today to be the case sometimes, sadly, and I'll get into this in explaining that. But it was hard. And so I really navigated to that lifestyle of being with the kids that the teacher said don't hang out with, and to mesh myself with those people because they understood and I understood them. And there was a family there. There was an understanding that I did not find in the church. And we would have conversations about Jesus in these groups in the streets and in violence and in drugs and in all these things. We were interested in Jesus. And I think even there, we didn't understand who he was, but we were hungry. And that's why I would kind of say something. It's not the teenagers so much that don't want to talk about these things. I think it's really the adults that don't want to talk about the things. And I think we build these programs around these really cheesy youth things. It's like, I heard a preacher say, it's like, okay, let's spell joy with our bodies on the ground for our youth. And it's just like, how effective is that? It's not really teaching us to communicate, to love, and to be with people who are unlike us or how we view as being unlike us. So that really began to
So Chuck,
navigate my
in
life.
that time, just so we can clarify, you began experimenting with drugs and alcohol. That was kind of part of what y'all were
100%,
doing.
because it was an escape, and I found I can be very socially awkward. When I get in areas where I'm around a lot of people at church, it's very uncomfortable for me. So I found out that alcohol very quickly could alleviate these social awkwardnesses that I possess, and I loved it. And then later on, smoking marijuana, and then other
Crutch.
drug sell a crutch, exactly. But it worked. It worked for a very long time, and I
And
love
you
it.
don't have words for it now. I mean, I think, you're just more introverted by nature.
I am.
That's all that is. And half of the population is more introverted, half is more extroverted. There's no wrong or right way about it. But
Right. But drugs definitely help with the extroverted part. And I think when you go
yeah,
into church, they kind of expect you to be extroverted. The small talk and these things like that, which I kind of abhor still, is small talk. I'm very bad at it. Any deep conversations, philosophy or theology, I love these conversations, but just the chit chat, to be honest. So it's still in me. It's this
and
discomfort.
it's your job to be
It's my
to
job.
be
But
yeah.
I love these opportunities to go a little bit deeper in real conversations. So drugs and alcohol like really began to take over my life. It was more than a crutch. It was how I navigated. It became the only way I could navigate. And again, I loved the people that were in that life. There was honesty in there that I didn't find in the church as well. But
When you
yeah,
found your people, you found your community, which I think that is we need our people around us.
yeah. And it's still my community. Even to this day, like that's still my community, largely. And so when we got back to Georgia and I was in this life for a long time, it was about 30 years old that life led to a dead end. There's a lot of details that lead up to that, but drugs, alcohol, violence, the criminal lifestyle, it will always lead to a dead end. I don't care how high you get, how powerful you get. Satan has a grasp in that lifestyle, and it's meant to steal, kill, and destroy. And at 30 years old, I had reached that point where I was doing cocaine. I had lost everything. The church had completely turned its back on me. And it was very, very lonely. And I was very, very angry. And I remember being at that space and I was no longer just mad at the church. Now I was mad at God. And I mean, me and God, I always consider myself a Christian. I love Jesus, but me and God, that hatred and that blame, I directed it at him. And I just told him, like, I declare myself your enemy till the day I die. I hate you. I mean, I would have caused violence on God had he been in my face. I would have been violent because it was a pure, and I'm trying to tone this down. It was a pure hatred. It was based on decades of hurt and just how I thought the church was the representative of God, and that wasn't necessarily true because God is beyond that. And so as I'm cussing God out and as I'm declaring myself his enemy, even though I was like baptized at 8 years old and accepted Christ into my heart, whatever that language is, it was at 30 when I found God because as I'm cussing him out and declaring myself his enemy, he's telling me that he loves me and that he understands. And it was a pure way. Like I say, I saw God. It was a pure experience where like I understood who God is and how I began to understand that God is Jesus because Jesus is who responded to me. And I began to like really began to understand who God is from that point on. And so that's been 20 years ago. It's never a straight path. And I think a lot of times when people think you accept Jesus into your life, it's happily ever after. That's not true for anybody. And it's never been a straight path. So even in seminary later on, like I stumbled, but God was
Well,
still
Chuck,
the same God.
yeah, I appreciate you sharing that story. And I too have had a chance to work in addiction and recovery. And I've learned that that solitary walk it happens to a lot of people. And just, rock bottom, of course, is a very common term, but just that feeling of just being so down and alone. And angry at God. I mean, I just hear that story again and again. And I've also known a lot of people to come out and have long-term sobriety, long-term recovery. And I always feel that you have to do it with God. To try to do it without him, it's just too hard.
In anything. And this is not just for people in addiction. I think this is where people get messed up is they think it's where the homeless people need God or, people in addiction and recovery need God. The church needs God. And really that's what I think he is trying to or asking me to really go to uncomfortable places back into the church. So even in this work and I'm looking for solutions, not band-aids, I think this industry has become we're just sticking our fingers in the dam to stop the leakage. But I think God wants a solution. And I think that's very possible with him. So yeah, I think the church is the answer. And when God told me that the church is the answer, I didn't like that answer because
Mm.
I was like, God, the big brother is at church and he doesn't like me very much. And he was very, very clear that the church is the answer to this problem. And I think one of the biggest myths in this space is we think it's the government's problem to fix, or we think it's somebody else's problem to
Preach.
fix. And it's really the biggest myth is that it's our problem to fix. This is a church problem. And I can talk about the numbers. Like there's almost 4,000 churches in Metro Atlanta. And there's only about 3,000 people in homelessness. And so when I started doing these numbers
I
and
was surprised at that number about, I thought the number would have been much higher in a city of Atlanta, what is our population?
6.3 million. And so there's 3.9 million Christians. And as I started to get these numbers in my head, like I saw a great big possibility. But for this great big possibility to work, the church has to become educated in this work. And it's not something that we can just pray away. We have to pray and we have to get involved and we have to learn and we have to unlearn almost everything we've learned since childhood about how to help people. So we have mission trips and mission teams that are these little snippets of visiting somebody that needs help. And then we leave thinking that the story's over. But their life is still going on just like we left it. I mean, we may have dug a well or we may have, built a brick house in Guatemala, or we may have dropped off some blessing bags downtown, but this is not solving anything because the problem is inside. The problem I had in Texas in my heart is the same problem that our friends in the church and on the streets are experiencing. There has to be this revival of what the gospel really is. And I think that's the biggest thing I've learned is people want to come downtown and share the gospel. And I'll ask them, so what's the gospel? And I remember when a woman asked me one time, I tried to approach her to de-escalate a situation. I was like, I'm a Christian too, because she was reading scripture at us. And she looked dead in my eyes and she goes, what does that mean? And it was like God himself asked me that question because I didn't have a memorized answer. I mean, sure, I could have come up with that answer that we learned in Sunday school about what a Christian is, but it was like God was asking me what that question actually means. And that question has not left me yet. So what does being a Christian mean? It means a lot more than handing off blessing bags and peanut butter and jelly sandwiches to people in need.
I think a lot of us would struggle with that question. a lot of us who are deep into our walk of faith. That's kind of where rubber meets the road right there. I need to do some work on that question for sure. So let's kind of transition to your life today. That was incredible backstory. And I love how, when there is such hardship and God is allowed to soften your heart and redeem your story, how he can often use it for good. And I love that that's part of your story and that you chose the path of working with the homeless to bring the church. Well, I'm not going to say to bring the church to them because you told me not to say that. You chose to serve in homelessness to be the hands and feet of Christ. So let's talk about that opportunity with Safe House Outreach and how you ended up there.
I don't think I chose homelessness. I think God chose me to work in this space because I don't think I would have chosen it. Because just like most people, I saw the problem as being way too big. God opened that door and kind of pushed me in. But what has happened in the 3.5 years that I've been at Safe House has been transformational. I've also have an education. I went to seminary and got these things. So when I got to Safe House, I was like, I'm about to teach these guys something. Like, I've been through this. God has redeemed me. God's brought me through this. I'm going to show you how this is done. And over the 3.5 years, God sat me down and shut me up and made me start learning in ways that I didn't expect. So opening my eyes through experiences with my friends in homelessness and really opening my eyes to just the machine and the industry that homelessness has become in the church and in nonprofits, not Safe House. There is so much money being poured into this. There's so much superficial things that there's so much waste because we're doing things that we assume that maybe we're taught as children, like, hey, here's somebody at the red light. I want to show my child how to help and I want to give them $5 out of my car window. This is a hard thing to unlearn that we're actually just causing harm. And we're doing this maybe in Jesus' name, but it's completely ineffective and harmful.
Okay. So if you could help us understand why activity like that is well-intentioned, but it's ultimately harmful.
What people don't realize is largely those problems have been met and solved in downtown Atlanta. I'm only talking about downtown Atlanta. I'm not talking about in more rural areas. But food insecurity is not an issue this gets me in trouble sometimes. Food insecurity is not an issue in downtown Atlanta. It is not. But when we see somebody on the side of the road that says, hey, I'm a homeless vet, I'm hungry, of course our hearts want to bleed and we're going to want to give them something. But they're not hungry because they can come to Safe House and get a meal. There's 7 other places they can get a meal, not to mention all the people that are giving them food out of their car at that red light. And if we don't have food, we're giving money. And since food is not the issue, that money is not going to go towards food. That money is going to go towards something that's going to keep them in that situation. So one of the biggest problems of homelessness is not just mental illness or addiction. It's the things that cause mental illness and addiction, like shame and guilt, things we've done in our life, trauma. And so when we're doing these things, we're not addressing any of the underlying issues. We are just trying to make ourselves feel better by doing something for that person. But that money, very, very often, and I'm not trying to stigmatize things, but there's a whole system of drug dealing set up in homelessness. So if you're homeless, people are actively trying to get you on drugs if you're not already. And if you're on drugs, they're going to make sure that they're very, very close, that you can get those whenever you want. So $5 is how much a bag of crack cocaine costs. Those bottles of vodka that you see all over the streets are 50 cents a piece. So that $5 is enough to keep somebody suffocating or trying to suffocate that suffering and guilt they're carrying instead of actually addressing it. So just like me when I was in that church, I needed somebody. I needed somebody to actually believe those words they were saying about hope and faith and compassion. I needed somebody like that, but I don't think we can't give what we don't have. Let's say that I'm meeting a young lady who's 19 years old. She has 3 children. She's schizophrenic. She's addicted to crack. She's pregnant again. She aged out of foster care. She has an 8th grade education and an 80 IQ. And I'm talking to her, and most things are nonsensical. And I'm the one who goes around talking about hope. Do I believe that there's hope for that young lady? And in my experience has taught me not really. Not really, there's not hope for that young lady. That's the truth of the flesh. But what I believe through Jesus and through the Holy Spirit is that miracles are possible. Like I wouldn't be here talking to you today if miracles weren't possible. I should be dead multiple times over and not in my right mind, but somehow I am. So I know miracles are possible. But I believe, we have these theologies or like, well, there's the cessation of miracles and all these other things. But like in this work, in this holy work that God has called us to rescue people through him out of this life, it is going to take a miracle. I don't talk a lot about fundraising or asking for money, even though we need these things. I'm asking for the 3.9 million people who claim to be Christians to start exploring these things themselves, because an awakening happens and that hope becomes real, the faith becomes real. And when these things actually happen, a transformation happens that it's not just us helping homeless people. Like that's what we think we're doing. It's not that. We are helping each other. We are growing a community together, and they are the church too. And I think,
Well, you multiply your numbers exponentially. Every nonprofit is working with a small staff, small team of dedicated volunteers. Money is always a great need, but especially with working in the field that you're working in, to have really caring, dedicated people, like that woman who wanted to give the $5 wants to help.
Yep.
She just doesn't know better. So that's why I love having these conversations with people like you, because people, for the most part, are really well-intentioned.
Yep.
And my call for people to step up to philanthropy is like, do something with your life. And I think homelessness is something that really tugs on our heartstrings. It really does. It's like any of us could be to that at any point in time, or our loved ones. And I think it's just something a lot of people can really, really relate to. And with proper training, really make a huge difference. And it's one-on-one, right? It's the story of that prodigal son. Every human being has value. They're precious in God's eye. And sometimes it just takes another person believing in you.
Yeah.
That can be the difference maker right there.
Yeah. That really is it. And so for the last 2 years, we have a lot of volunteers. There's a lot of people coming to the city on weekends to set up tents and wears matching t-shirts and has cameras feeding people sandwiches, not learning names, not learning stories, not coming back and trying to find those same people. That's a very large problem. And again, when you have a big feeding, also the drug dealer is going to be there because that's their clientele. So they're going to be wherever the people are. So what we're trying to get people to realize is, don't try to solve this problem on your own. You will only mess up by doing this on your own. You're going to go by your assumptions and your heart. The heart makes a really poor brain.
They're not.
Join an organization that gives you the ability to learn. This knowledge doesn't come to overnight. And so we welcome people who are nervous. We welcome people who are uncomfortable. We understand that. It's not always
That's when it gets good.
It's not an easy thing to do sometimes. And to see that suffering and to be completely impotent to do something about it. That is a frustration that God will use to gift you with those gifts that you need to actually be able to do something about. So what we do is like, it's been a heavy lift to get volunteers to say, okay, thank you for coming to serve the food. Like we need that food every night. So we serve the meals 5 nights a week. Used to do it 7 until we realized there's enough food on the weekends that we need a Sabbath. But we do this and we're trying to get our volunteers to understand is like, don't stand on the other side of a table full of clothes and not even knowing the people you're giving those clothes to. Don't just give somebody a clamshell of food and say, God bless you and go in peace. Get out from behind that serving table and go sit with somebody and learn that story and listen. I mean, what I've learned is the gospel doesn't start with this. The gospel starts with this. And we talk and we talk and we talk, but we're not listening. And what we don't realize is we are in the Bible Belt. We're in the Bible Belt of Atlanta, Georgia. Everybody knows about Jesus. Nobody's sharing any new information. I know friends on the streets that will quote the Bible better than me, better than most pastors I know who talk about it. But then there's people who come in and are like, hey, let me share the gospel with you. And they're going to smile and they're going to like act like they're listening to you because they know they can get something from you. And then you leave feeling that you've really accomplished this great commission, but you really haven't, because there's been no connection. We've learned these methods since childhood, like from mission teams and mission trips, that we go serve temporarily, very surface level, and we leave and we go tell the whole church how we changed the world. And that's not the way it works. It really is diving in, getting involved in somebody's life with us or with somebody who knows what they're doing, and being a contact and a reliable other for that person. So relational poverty is the problem of homelessness. Relational poverty is the problem of homelessness, not just poverty. It is, we all have a community of reliable others to cheer us on, to encourage us, to pick us up when we fall. But imagine, if you don't make your appointment, nobody's following up with you, that you didn't make your appointment for housing. We are building that with our mentorship program through Christian Professionals Network Worldwide. We are building advocacy. We're building people to check in on people and to really be friends and to walk with somebody through their life. And this is, again, it's not happily ever after. It's not like, oh, you got housing, everything is good. That's another myth I realized. Housing is not the solution to homelessness. And I think that surprises people. We think that we can put somebody in a house or an apartment and then their life is all automatically better. Now, I want to preface this by saying, if you're a family, if you're a mother and you got 3 kids, housing first works. The statistics show that that's a good model to get a family off the street, because you'll be eaten up on the streets of Atlanta. Get them off the streets and put them somewhere safe, and then have the wraparound services to help them. But if you're a single man, and let's say, there's an increasing population of 55 and older in homelessness, about 35%. And let's say that you've served some time in prison, you don't have job skills, and you're like, okay, we're just going to get you an apartment. What people don't realize is if you go to the parks, there's a whole, they have community. That's their friends. Like, that's my friends. I would rather go hang out there than the office.
Mm-hmm.
And so to say, okay, we're going to remove you from this community and we're going to go put you in an apartment. It's like saying, like, you send your kid to college and saying, you go to the dorm room and you never come out. That's just your home for now on. It doesn't work, because if I'm mentally ill or drug addicted, no matter where I go, there I am. And now I'm just have a roof over my head for about a month until it implodes because of my mental health and drug addiction. And plus, I can't have my friends over to my house to stay. So what kind of heartless person would you have to be to have been homeless, to now have a roof over your head, and your friends are still on the street homeless, and to say, oh, you have to stay there, I have a roof over my head, and you can't come, because they'll kick me out if they find out. So the housing first model is kind of broken. There has to be some wraparound services, which we're trying to build in a real way. So even case management is not enough. Case management is way overworked.
Mm-hmm.
And we saw this. And a lot of the ideas I have came from an organization called CASA. And at CASA, Court Appointed Special Advocates, we had trained volunteers to advocate for kids in foster care. And a kid with an advocate, one advocate, not a case manager with 50 cases, could go in that courtroom and advocate properly for the specific needs of that child. And that child gets out of foster care about twice as fast. That means they don't age out of foster care and wind up on the streets. So we know that advocacy works. And I'm not saying case management doesn't work. I'm not saying housing doesn't work, but I'm saying there's an incompleteness there. And I think the church is the biggest missing gap in this. Church is very quick to give us blessing bags. We don't need blessing bags. I know that's going to kind of shock people, but people are bringing blessing bags with laundry detergent and Lysol and gloves and a blanket and comb, and they don't need all that. So they're going to take the toothbrush out, and all that other stuff is on the ground, or the much worse, the $5 they get out of it, and everything else is on the ground. So even the logical non-Christian can look, if they were to see the amount of waste in this space, they would support the things I'm saying, because we are trying to be, I think it was almost $100 million last year spent on homelessness.
What was that number?
It was, I know the government, the city gave $60 million. I think some of the research says by this year it's supposed to be $212 million. The more money, and so even with that extra money, the amount of the unhoused, kind of the chronically homeless, went up 41% this year to 1,040 people. And that's really the people that my main focus is on. Those are the people that we see every day. And I would go to the park when I first got to Safe House, and I'd be like, come to Safe House, we can help you, there's hope. And I'd bring them back, and they would leave discouraged. And not because of Safe House, but because their needs were deeper than a surface level encounter that we could offer them at Safe House, like a voucher or a meal. That's not just what people need. They need love, and they need a love that they believe. And really, that's the crux of everything I'm trying to say is we
Hey,
have
Chuck, before
the only way we fix homelessness is we go into that forest and we encounter the trees in that forest, and we stop seeing homeless people and we start seeing people, our brothers and sisters, and we start to really, when we encounter these people and we see their struggles, it drives us closer to Jesus. Because now I got to figure out what an answer is. Because now I love this person, not this generic homeless person. I love this person, and I want to help this person. And you're going to find out that there's drug addiction, there's mental illness, there's all these barriers, there's judgments in our own hearts about these people that we all have to overcome. So again, this is not just about the people in homelessness. This is about the church and the awakening of the church. The church has decreased 12% in the last 10 years. And I believe it's because people don't believe us anymore. And really it is because we are not getting involved in people's lives in real ways to walk with them, to invest in our thousands of friends that we encounter every year in a very personal way. And now I can't help 100 people. I can help one person. And we realize with the numbers of the churches and Christians that we can surround every person in homelessness with a community, not go put them in a church in a box, but to get people out of that box into the community like Jesus did. And that's what we're trying to do. We are here to help restore lives through faith, love, and compassionate service. But the beautiful thing is, it's not just people in homelessness having their lives restored. People in the church are having their lives restored. And so, like, what is faith? What is love? What is compassionate service? These are all very generic terms in the English language. Like, what is love? What is love when a gentleman gets out of prison? He just did 15 years. They dropped him off in front of a safe house. And we become friends and earn trust with this gentleman. And we find out he's done the worst possible things you can imagine to somebody. The things that make you sick and the things that make you not want to love that person, we love them. That's what love is. That's the agape love that Jesus talks about. It's not this easy love. Faith. What is faith? Do I believe that Jesus can really restore the lives of the people who are hurting and suffering? Absolutely, I do. And then compassion is made up of two words. The words compassion means to suffer with. Now, this is going to block some people to say, I have enough suffering in my own life. I'm not trying to sign up to enter into somebody else's suffering. But something really beautiful happens when our willingness, just like Jesus did when he came to earth, is to step into a suffering with us. Emmanuel, God with us. And so when we step into suffering, something beautiful happens to our own suffering as well. I mean, my air conditioner is struggling, and I'm suffering because I need air conditioner in my house to sleep at night. But now I'm going to work, and I'm sitting with a gentleman or a young lady who is having experiences every day of rape. And I hate using words like this, of being hit and beaten, bullets go through their tents at night. And now it makes me look at my own suffering and be like, I'm not suffering. But I can enter into that suffering. My suffering alleviates and gets put in perspective, and I can do something about the other person's suffering with that person. But we have to enter that. Love is not a generic term. We cannot love somebody we don't know. We can't pray for somebody we don't know. So, I'm not convinced that praying for the homeless population of Atlanta without knowing the homeless population of Atlanta has any value whatsoever. It is when we know that person personally, we know their problems, we know their struggles, and I sit with that person and I pray with them, and they pray for me. And that's the beautiful thing as well, is when I used to go out with big backpacks full of waters and hot dogs and hand them out. I go out with nothing anymore. And now my friends see me and they pray with me. They see me need water, they give me water. And I think that's the thing, is when we start seeing humans as children of God. And I tell the church all the time is don't come here thinking you're going to serve the least of these, and I hear that all the time. I know Jesus said the least of these, but there's no least of these where I work. There's no least of these in downtown Atlanta. Everybody we encounter is made in the image of God, in the child of God. And so the way that we see people and the way that we label people is going to be the way that we interact with them and love them. And if we're just looking at them as the least of these, we're automatically putting ourselves higher than them. And some of the greatest in the kingdom of heaven are on the streets of Atlanta.
That is just so eye-opening in so many ways. It's just such a radical approach, but it's so simple. It's really so simple. And I think as Americans, we're a consumer-based society. Our solution is always money and stuff. And
Yeah.
you're saying it's not. Stop with the stuff. We need people. We need your hands. We need your feet. We need you to care and to get involved. Do you know what some of the obstacles are for people not wanting to get involved? Can you share some of those? Is it a safety thing for a lot of people? Are they concerned for their safety? What's holding us back?
I think a lot of people have tried to help on their own. I've done this, and a lot of things I've learned has been before Safe House, where I've gone out and seen suffering and got somebody a pay-per-week hotel, or have given them goods or groceries. And finding those things can be completely unhelpful, even, like I said, harmful. I think others have tried things. I've known people to be like, I used to know this person in high school. I'm going to let them come live with me. Bad idea. Bad idea. And a bad thing happens, and now they're done helping forever. They're like, I've seen what happens when I try to help. It doesn't work. They don't want help. And then all this judgment starts to come, which is understandable. And that's why I really kind of emphasize is join somebody doing this work. Do not do this work on your own. I think that's one reason. People have tried to help and they've been completely unable to do any good at all, and they've suffered for it. And I think they're just like, okay, this is something I can't do. I think there's a lot of blame. So even as I go back into some churches and they look at me now and they don't know who I used to be. And like, they don't understand that the people they're talking about, they're talking to. And so that's what I'm saying. When I go into the church and I hear the judgment, they chose this. I pulled myself up by my own bootstraps, which is a lie. Nobody pulls herself up by their own bootstraps. I don't care who you are. Um, and so there's been a lot of those things. The judgment, they don't want it. If they wanted it when they're ready, that's the thing I hear a lot too, is like they have to be ready first. Well, I believe what the thing is, they need hope first. And they haven't heard the real hope. They've heard temporary sermons with peanut butter sandwiches saying, I love you and I'm going to pray for you and I'm never going to see you again. And then they leave expecting there's been a transformation happen, and it didn't happen. So I think that I think fear is another thing. I mean, violence is real. There's a whole system, again, of gangsters and drug dealers set up around people in homelessness. I think the church can learn a lot from these drug dealers and gangsters because they're very good at what they do. And why are they good? Because there's proximity and they're there 24/7. The church is not there 24/7. And a lot of times we're not in proximity of the people in need. We're just driving through as quick as we can to get rid of this task we have to do to help somebody as quick as we can. But there's no real relationship. So yeah, I mean, there's fear, still the assumptions. I know volunteers that volunteered 10 years that still think people are starving to death on the street. So there's a lack of education, which we're really focused on trying to educate people about these things. And then again, there's the things we've been taught forever. Like, let's give our leftover clothes to homeless people. And there are so many clothes that people don't need. And we give nice clothes. People get beat up for clothes. People get robbed for clothes. People use their clothes or giveaways for currency to buy drugs. There was a huge encampment on Pryor Street, and a lieutenant sent me this email that they put a camera up for 2 days at this encampment. 74 cars pulled up in 2 days to drop off goods at this city of homelessness. So they already have the tents, they already have food, they already have these needs that people have with their heartstrings are just giving, not realizing there's a whole industry around that particular type of giving. That money, the tents, it becomes a very violent and bad place. And not many people want to go into that place. I hesitate to kind of say this, but I think maybe we don't believe what we preach. Or maybe we don't believe that restoration is possible. Or maybe that we don't think that they are worthy of it, and we are. And really, like I said, with the three and a half years I've been at Safe House, what I've learned, what God has worked on me is my own hypocrisy, my own use of words that I thought I believed, like love and faith and all these things, and hope especially, to really drive me deeper into God through his Holy Spirit to start to believe those things. Because I think when we believe them, then we'll start doing them. But I think just going to church on Sunday and doing some volunteer activities, I don't think that's going to necessarily foster the belief that's needed to transform this situation.
Yeah.
We have to get
Well,
involved.
we talked a little bit earlier about what does success look like in loving and serving our homeless people. And I guess it's different for each individual. And you helped me understand that the American dream, they may not want a house. They may not want a job. The thought of a traditional job for a lot of them is like entering the rat race. Why would I want to do that? We're not all cut out for that type of life. So helping them envision another pathway, I think is kind of a cool thing. And I love that what you guys do at Safe House. It's very holistic. It's built around the one. It's not formulaic. Help us understand some of those ways that you kind of love on them and put them on their pathway to restoration.
So I'll explain this one with a story. So this one, there was a gentleman when I got there 3 years ago named Roy. And Roy has some mental delays, super sweet man. And he would come to Safe House every day and help clean the building. A gentleman in homelessness, but would just come in and he loved us and he loved being around us and he loved just being a part of the family of Safe House and belonging, which is not something he, I think, experienced necessarily on the streets. And then we found out that Roy had stage 4 breast cancer. So what do you do when you find out your friend in homelessness has stage 4 breast cancer? I don't know. And I think that's a lot of times that people think that like we have all the answers. We're still learning. 43 years later, we are still learning lessons. And so we didn't know what to do with Roy, but we knew that Roy needed to get off the street. And one of our amazing employees had a small place kind of out of the city to put him in, and everybody's rejoicing because now Roy has a bed and a shower and a tub and a TV and a lazy boy chair. And we're like, man, Roy, and chickens in the yard to play with. And we're like, man, Roy must be in heaven. And we're so, but Roy wasn't in heaven. Roy was separated from his community that he has spent the last decades on the streets. The people who actually did love him and care for him, the people who actually did ask about him and know him by name. And now he's away from that, safe, but alone. And it imploded. And we learned a lot from that lesson. And he came back to the streets. So Jill was her name. So Jill really loved Roy and took so much upon herself to make sure that Roy was taken care of and advocated for. And so as his cancer progressed, she would go to the doctor's office with him and advocate for him where he could advocate for himself. And then it came the time for hospice. And so hospice, if you're in homelessness, does not mean that your last days are going to be easy. They're going to put you in a wing of the hospital that may not be getting the services that, especially at a hospital that's really overworked, is not going to get the attention and care they need, and they're going to die on that bed alone. And Jill was not okay with that. So we got Jill into a housing. But again, the housing was now in the city, but you're in a room alone. And imagine dying and knowing you're going to die alone. So Jill continued to advocate for him. And so even when he went into hospice for one day and Jill saw that apartment or the place in the hospital, she goes, oh, no, we're taking him out. And she took this weight upon her to really care for Roy. And so Roy died a couple of months ago. He passed away. He didn't pass away alone. So I think a lot of times we want to define success from our terms. We have to forget our terms of success. Our terms of success are even completely different than Jesus's understanding of success. No, Roy never got a job. He never had a place really of his own, but he had somebody with him.
Yes.
And
He was loved.
that was loved. And so the reason I knew these
Dang.
things is to tell these stories like this is that forget what you think about homelessness and getting people into housing and getting people into jobs. Not to say that these things are not important. They are important, but people need people who love them. Roy knew that Jill loved him, knew it. And he died bravely. He died knowing he was loved. And that only happened because somebody got out of the box.
Man, that's some big love right there. And I'm sure, even though her heart is probably broken in a million pieces, Jill would do it all over again.
And she died.
And the sacrifice is worth it.
Yep. So that's
how
what we're looking for. That's why I do these talks is like Christians, church, if 1%,
yeah.
if 1% of 4 million people, that's 40,000 people. 40,000 people, 40,000 Christians can solve this problem. Not put a Band-Aid on it, but we have to be willing to have compassion to suffer with. We have to be willing to redefine what we think love is with this agape form of love that Jesus had. And we got to have faith that God can restore lives. So in our mission statement, we say we help restore lives. We don't restore lives. Churches don't restore lives. Christians don't restore lives. Only God restores lives. But people have to believe it. There has to be a gospel that people believe. And just saying that, hey, if you accept Jesus, you get to go to heaven when you die forever and ever, it's not enough. That gospel does not transform even me. To say a man died for me 2,000 years ago for my sin is not going to help me transform the deepest, darkest part of my life. But to understand that there's Easter, that he rose again, and that the Holy Spirit comes into us. And so I tell churches all the time, you're not bringing Jesus downtown Atlanta. Jesus is here and he's waiting on you to get here. And so you're not dropping Jesus off. We're going on a mission trip. It's like, no, like maybe you're coming on this mission trip to discover Jesus yourself because he's here. And I see what he does with people like Jill, like that's what we're after. And so I always tell people when you come volunteer, I don't want you to leave patting yourself on the back that you fed some homeless people. I want you to leave bothered that you met a friend like Roy and that you know his predicament and now you're bothered enough to do something about it. And we have the resources and the people. So this is a call for the church. That's why I do this. We are calling the church to get involved, to go deeper, to stop worrying about just giving food and standing on one side of the table, handing things out to strangers. Get out into the kingdom of God and sit at a table because that's where it's at. The kingdom is in our midst. The kingdom is in our midst. It's not something that happens when we die, but we have to be willing to step out into that discomfort because you don't get to God comfortably.
I am very emotional right now. Thank you for sharing that story. I'm writing a book on the Beatitudes and how our attitudes really can hold us back in our lives, or it can be transformational, and wrapping scripture into that. And the chapter that I've been working on this week is be hospitable. And I'm not going to be able to quote the Bible verse, but maybe you can help me since you got your theology degree. But it's about be willing to extend hospitality, for you may be entertaining angels.
I know it from experience. Let me put it that way. So I
Yeah,
know
but I mean that's the story. You never know. You never know who you will encounter.
you don't.
God shows up in miraculous ways that you can never imagine. And a lot of times you see Jesus in those people. Well, Anna, who founded the Christian Professionals Networking Ministry, she had an encounter with a homeless person, and it was very mysterious, um, how she found her way to Jesus. And you can only think that, maybe that was an angel that came her way to help her connect with Jesus.
Well, even
She
even
just
Anna is an angel herself coming in, and a lot of the things, the ideas that were formulating in my mind were already happening in her brain. So when we met, like we've already been working towards a common kind of idea before we even knew each other. And so the mentorship program that we're putting together through the Christian Professionals Network worldwide, we do believe is going to be transformative and possibly transform this nation.
Well, Chuck, you just enlightened me so much, and I know people listening to this will be like, I just didn't know. When we know better, we do better. So my tag at Uncommon Philanthropist is let go. So I love my guests to wrap it up with, say the words let go, however that presents in your heart, and then just preach for a little bit on what does that let go mean to the work you do.
I think letting go in this work, it means letting go of what you think you know about helping people, about maybe what you've been taught in the church with your family about helping people from afar. But letting go looks like getting involved in where you're putting your money. Don't just send us your money. Get involved, get uncomfortable, put your faith to the test. Like for real, like would you believe your faith? And if you can't believe it, why in the world would somebody suffering believe it? Letting go looks like not caring about your life as a way. And Jesus talks about this. We talk about eternal life. We believe we're going to heaven when we die, but we're so afraid and we're just like tiptoeing through life so carefully to arrive at death one day safely, which is an insane way to live. Because if we believe in God and we believe that God is watching us and walking with us, like it encourages us to be braver, to have more courage. Letting go looks like that. Have more courage in your faith. Have more courage that Jesus can do things in this world. And there's things, quite simply, that we think that we can vote or hire or pay somebody to fix the problems we see in this world. We can't.
Or look to
It's
the government.
our problems to fix. The government can't love. The church can love, but we can only love in person. And I think that's the misconception as well. It's like we think we can love impersonally, and that's not what love is.
Afar. You got to get close.
Yeah.
You got to get
Do
in
the
there.
hard things, do the uncomfortable things, and watch what God does with that. Because again, people think I'm just talking about people in homelessness. I'm not. I think when the church starts to get involved in real ways, this huge decline that we're seeing in Christianity in the Bible Belt will reverse. But I don't think the world is necessarily wrong to disbelieve us right now because we're in the box or we're just visiting other countries or we're just visiting homelessness. And they're like, I don't really believe that. And to be honest, I don't either. And I think that when we get involved, we're going to believe in our God much, much more. And people are going to believe in our God much, much more. And there will be a revival in the church, unlike we've seen in America up to this point.
Well, that is good stuff.
Thank you.
Keep up the great work. And thank you for being here and sharing your story on Uncommon Philanthropist.
Thank you so much, Rena. I appreciate it.
Okay. Let go. Say it.
Well, let go.
Let go.
Let go.
Come on, preach it. Let go.
Let go and come and see.